Volume 4 C46. The dragons who fled from demons, to fight demons, the mates and heirs of Olisur Dark, approached the fallen of their number. Their heads loomed large over the king who rode him into battle. I never thought much of him. A faintly feminine voice rumbled while looking down at the savagely cut-up body of the young dragon, but he did well out here today. Ainz didn't look up from the fallen one. This was my doing. I wanted an easy win to boost the confidence of the dwarves. Hedgenmal wasn't ready to fight demons, even ones that were not at their full potential. Guilt tugged at his heart. He didn't look up over his shoulder. Which of you was his mother? Ainz asked. I. 3 voices resounded as they sought to claim the fallen hero as their own. It's easy to go into battle knowing you'll win. It isn't so easy when you don't know that. He was very brave, Ainz said of the corpse. The rest of the clan said nothing. There was nothing to be said. Brave enough for a second chance, Ainz said, and then removing his hand from the corpse, he plucked a wand from his dimensional storage space and removed a wand of resurrection. The wand was the length of a man's forearm, and held a red jewel at the tip cut into diamond-like angles and set deep into the wood so that only the pentagon shape bulged outward a little. Resurrection. Ainz released the spell, and the corpse sucked in a deep breath. Did we win, sire? Hedgenmal asked without raising his head. Would you be alive if we hadn't? Ainz asked and placed a free hand on the dragon's head. No, I suppose not. That was a foolish question. Forgive me, sire. But I saw them and assumed we had all died, Hedgenmal said and looked up at the array of dragon faces hovering near. You did. All right, out there, Hedgenmal. His eldest half-brother said with reluctance. Thank you, brother. But then, if we're alive, if you're alive, how did you come to be here? Hedgenmal asked in stupefied confusion, and with the swiftness of a sloth, he began to move his limbs. That is a very long story. Your father died, we assumed you had also, but we escaped among the Quagga when our way out was cut off. For some time the two of us fought against the daily onslaughts of demons, until word was brought to us of, I assume, you? The female dragon who was speaking shifted her gaze from her son to Ainz. Ainz ignored the beginnings of cheers within the city as the reality hit home and the survivor of the skirmish was seen to move again. Their first real victory of any sort in a long time, the dwarven spirits were shooting higher than the mountain in which they lived. Already Ainz could smell the flow of beer in the distance. The female dragon that addressed Hedgenmal, and then Ainz, adopted the role of voice for the small clan, and began to explain everything they learned from scouts, observations, and survivors who fled to carry word to them. The full explanation took some time, which bought Ainz time to think as he looked up at the large ice-blue frost dragon. So Euro is on his way here. With all his people. Except for those who decided to remain to buy time for the others. Yes. Yaldabaoth is enemy to us all. He killed our mate. Now killed my son, and threatens to slaughter, torture, or enslave us all. I am told you bested him once before. This is true? She asked and cocked her head at him. I did. Ainz replied to her. I saw your fight. You held back? She asked, hesitant but hopeful. He clenched his fist hard enough to crack his knuckles. I did. I can't say when Yaldabaoth may appear, but he will come here. I had to be ready and at full strength. Ainz answered, and they nodded in understanding. But you came hoping for help. And you are not mine. It would be far wiser of me to simply refuse and let you bear the brunt of Yaldabaoth's assault, and then finish him when he's weakened. I can save many lives that way. You'd leave us? They asked as one, dragons or not. The sight of Yaldabaoth using their patriarch, the most powerful of their number as if he were a mere club, then shattering the mountain with his body and casting him out to his doom was still fresh in their minds. Ainz waved a hand with dismissal. Yes, you have no loyalty to me. I can't throw away loyal subjects to assist strangers who offer me nothing, especially if they will actively oppose me later. The dragons collectively looked down at Hedgenmal, and the eldest female spoke again. My son has been faithful, hasn't he? He died under me, so yes, Ainz said in a clipped and displeased tone and set his hands on his hips. Though she towered over him, she felt more as if she were looking up, rather than down. Her blood ran like her icy breath through her veins. Hedgenmal, what do you think? Ainz asked. They looked at the young runt that proved himself in the field of the stone sky. Salvation or destruction lay in his talons. Hedgenmal rose to his feet. He was shaky, unsteady, and even his head wobbled a bit on his neck, but he spoke with crystal clarity. I would ask that you spare them with your help, let them serve you and prove their loyalty. You gave me a chance, my lord. Let them have one, the only one I had real reason to hate is now dead. That's enough for me. Ainz let the dragons sweat for a moment, and allowed Hedgenmill to bask in their desperate collective gratitude. Then, as if he was unsure of his decision, he turned his masked eyes from the dragon at his feet, to the dragon overhead, and nodded. I will kill Yaldabaoth, or at least seal him away. When it is over, you will leave this mountain and fly to the kingdom of Nazarick, where you will be assigned tasks that will let you begin to earn my trust. He let the moment hang for a moment, then put a hand on Hedgenmill. This one died under me. Do not complain if it takes time for you to raise your status in my eyes. Ainz learned something new at that moment. When a dragon starts to swallow, it takes a very long time for them to finish. Volume 4 C47. Yaldabaoth had no reason to rush regarding anything. He even waited a few days to give the Quagga who fled from him a nice head start and plenty of rest. He then summoned a few disposable demons and set out for the Quagga's stronghold. The survivors should be there by now, as should the escapees, though they probably won't have remained behind. And unless Pei-Euro is utterly inept, he should be reaching my master soon, maybe not in time for the skirmish, but soon after. Yaldabaoth had many thoughts of this sort as he trod on through the winding stone paths, tunnels, mining ways, and so on in search of the Quagga who stayed behind to buy time for their fellows. He could hear them, so many breathing, so many panting in fear. It carried like an infection left with them by those who ran away in fear of him. They are the wise ones. The rest. Foolish courage is an expression for a reason. The demons advanced first, common ones that were weak enough that the Quagga could defeat them, but strong enough that they could inflict horrendous casualties before dying. The Quagga's strategy remained unchanged, drowning the demons in their life's blood by clawing their way up to the top and striking the eyes or open mouths. The insects were brave enough, Yaldabaoth would grant them that much. The smell of blood filled the stale air of the cave. The desperation of the Quagga in their final hours was a testament to their resilience as a people. The way they hurled themselves on the demons with relentless abandon, pushed to the limit by Yaldabaoth's relentless experimentation with their abilities. They lacked the creativity of weaker races like humans, but did show unique physical resilience and significant amounts of courage. But now he was satisfied. I know enough about them now. And Nazarick needs scrolls. He thought, and entered the fray, stretching out his hand, and said in a tranquil sort of voice, burn. Those within a 3-meter space around him had the air ignited in their lungs, and they toppled over, unable even to scream as they died. The eerie silence of their deaths brought the breaking point, to the eyes of those who did not experience his slaughter technique as he walked into their desperate ranks. It appeared that they simply died by getting close. An enemy that could kill simply by proximity was a hopeless fight, and yet still some came on, struggling against all odds to buy their own retreating people just one more minute of time between Yaldabaoth and their migrating flight away from their former refuge. He can't kill us all. Some fool shouted from atop a rock while attempting to rally the flagging courage of those who surrounded him. Yes, I can. Yaldabaoth replied as he lumbered on, an untouchable giant and impossible force of evil unrivaled in their world, or their history, or even in their most dreaded and feared mythologies. Just one more minute. Hold him for one more minute. Someone else called out just before they fell forward with their lungs incinerated. He toppled back, staring up at the stones above with the blank and empty eyes of the dead. I'll make so many scrolls out of you all. Feel privileged that you get to experience the joy of serving the one supreme being. Even if you're not alive to do it. Yaldabaoth thought and opened his arms out wide like he was going to embrace someone, but all he did was expand the range of slaughter by a fair amount. And now I'm bored, Yaldabaoth said, and beat his great wide wings, sending gusts hard enough that Quagga warriors were bowled over into their fellows farther away, knocking Quagga over in heaps. Some looked on, disbelief etched on their open-mouthed faces. Is he running away? They wondered. Did we win? They asked themselves, until the towering demon laughed and began to fly over their army. Immediately their warriors began to die in masses. He flew low over their ranks, his wings battering the still air, and carried him over the tops of their heads, making their already futile efforts even more hopeless than before. The area of effect skill, or spell, or whatever he used lost none of its effectiveness as he soared laughing over his dying victims. What remaining spirit they had was left broken with his unreachability. Quagga began to knock one another over, scrambling, uncaring over the bodies of those they called brother not but 20 minutes before. They pulled at the fur of others to claw their way over the heads of others, pushing off shoulders to jump as far away as they could from the remaining formation to run for safety after the tribe they were supposed to sacrifice their lives to protect. This led to a quick end for some, who tumbled back away from their comrades and into Yaldabaoth's radius of death. They too died in silent agony. The formations became carpets and the rooted who fought one another for survival became dead little hills with silent screams displayed in the dark cave to reveal the horror of their deaths to anyone who cared to look. When it was over at long last, with almost none remaining but the 2 or 3 who fled successfully after their kin, Yaldabaoth opened the portal to Nazarick and summoned a few of his servants. A dozen little imps emerged with their bobbing little tails, sharp chins, and dark hair hanging loose behind red flesh. They had a little stoop to their walk and claw-like hands with sharp teeth to match. Take the bodies, harvest the skins for scrolls and the meat to feed our beasts. Then plunder this entire camp for anything we can use. Leave nothing of even the remotest value behind. Nazarick needs all the resources it can get. Demiurge gave the order while in Yaldabaoth's eyes, and the little imps bobbed their heads up and down. They were not the strongest of demons, but they were very quick and completely obedient, scurrying around like little rats. They carried the corpses 2 or 3 at a time over each shoulder, but they organized themselves quickly to conduct their work, transporting the bodies to his farm for skinning, while tearing through every box, barrel, and bag for everything down to a mushy piece of moss that might be consumable. It may take hours, maybe even another day or 2, but what of it? I don't want to catch up to Peri before he reaches my master. That would ruin the dramatic flourish he seems to love so much, and if he loves it that much, it must be correct. Perhaps I should try to be more dramatic as well, he might appreciate that. A few lessons from Pandora's actor might help. Yaldabaoth enjoyed the process of contemplation by itself while he took a seat on a bloody rock, crossed one leg over the other, folded his hands together and rested them on his thigh, and watched his minions work. Volume 4 C48. Peri didn't hate dwarves like most of his people. To him, they were like rocks that had to be tunneled through. They were simply in the way, that is why they had to die. There can only be one king under the mountain. He recalled the thought when he decided to have the dwarves wiped out. The early success in capturing a few dwarven prisoners and using them to learn agriculture and other useful arts had only solidified his fundamental view. They are more of a threat to us than dragons. Had he ever said that aloud, he would have been laughed at without a doubt, but he was certain he was right. The dragons were stronger, but by the nature of their bodies they simply couldn't make anything for themselves. They needed the Quagga to procure the things they wanted. Even if they oppressed the Quagga, they wouldn't eliminate his race. But there was nothing the dwarves could not make for themselves, and so the Quagga were not needed. Had they the power to do it, the dwarves would have wiped his people out to get at Oz just the same as he'd been doing to them. So trudging toward his enemy didn't bring up the same visceral hatred that it did for the rest of his migrating people. When the Great Rift, and the guarding fortress, finally came into view, he was the only one to feel relief. What he knew of the dwarves was that they were pragmatic. They need allies, so do we. He thought, as much to reassure himself as for anything else. So, he stepped farther away from his people and held his hands up. The fortress was not unimpressive, but it held only a few hundred dwarves. His scouts in the days when he'd been planning the assault had all assured him of that much. A result of their steep decline in numbers, no doubt. He mused, but it was still a fortress and would leave a fair number of dead or wounded even when lightly defended. The lightning weapons the dwarves used had caused many brutal injuries in the past. I wonder how many we would have lost taking it if Yaldabaoth had not come? The question would never be answered, which meant, he reassured himself again, we are now on the same side. They have to see that, this foreigner must. That offers a chance for reason even if the dwarves decide to be less than pragmatic this time. With his hands up as high as he could hold them, the fortress defenders were obviously still nervous. They were shuffling about, and voices filled with alarm carried all the way to where he stood. But Peri did not panic, his breath caught, and he took another step closer. Stop right there. The voice at the top of the fortress shouted. Peri obeyed but shouted back, hoping his headdress would make it obvious he was in a position of authority. "I am Peiriro, ruler over all the Quagga. I want to speak with the foreign king, the enemy of the demon emperor Yaldabaoth." The dwarf must have been taken aback by this, as he neither spoke nor struck, and for a more than uncomfortable moment, silence held between them. "All the Quagga are with you?" The dwarf's pitch went up an octave higher. "All those still alive?" "Yes," Peiriro shouted back. He looked up at the high tower, doing his best not to look behind him at the hopeless followers who were only slightly in view. "We suffered terrible losses, but what we have left will fight with you." I can't make this decision. Wait there, we will send for the king's word. Then let me, and one other, go with you." Peiriro shouted. "The dwarves would probably prefer we die without ever crossing the bridge. If I can speak ruler to ruler." "All right. Just you and one other. Stay there, we'll send someone down now." "Hurry," Peiriro shouted back, slowly lowering his hands as he did. "Yaldabaoth may not be far behind us." That sent shouts of alarm throughout the fortress. The ones who thought themselves least likely to face the wrath of the demon emperor, now found themselves potentially bearing the brunt of it. "Bring out Quad War," Peiriro shouted behind him loud enough that only his aides could properly hear him. Quad War was spared from the horrified looks of his people by being allowed to ride in concealment in one of the few small wagons, more like a three-legged wheelbarrow than anything else, carried where he had to be, and riding where he could. Almost none of his people had seen the unfortunate bottling that had somehow survived the horrific experimentation. "If this doesn't make for a compelling argument, we're all as good as dead," Peiriro told himself, and waited while a few aides rushed the little barrow-like wagon over until it was well out of sight of their population at large. "We will go alone from here," Peiriro said as they fell in at his back and helped Quad War out of his place and get his feet on the floor. He looked over his shoulder. "If I don't come back, attack. There's no hope left for us, so let the dwarves be as weak as possible when Yaldabaoth comes for them. There's no survival if we don't make it through this, and I don't plan on us dying alone." They gave grim nods to their chief and clenched their fists. The dwarven head of Quad War, however, piped up, "I don't know anything about a foreign king, but my council is smart enough to know the danger, and if they're not, I'll make them see. A look at us." The Quaggoan head spoke, "And they will clamber to be our allies and dance for the privilege. You'd both better be right. I don't want to die at all, let alone in such a stupid way," Peiriro replied, and they began the long awkward walk as soon as a dwarf guide emerged. The dwarf guide took one look at Quad War and bent over to retch. "Yaldabaoth's handiwork." Quad War answered the vomit with a stoic explanation. The dwarf fell to the ground shaking, and Peiriro understood that at least, "Yes, that is why we're here. We fight together or die apart." The dwarf began not a walk, but a jog toward the long bridge over the great rift. Though its metal cables creaked and the narrow bridge swayed, it held firm. Quad War grabbed both sides and made his curious quick hopping motion after the chief, while Peiriro did the same in a slow, steady walk so as not to greatly outpace the crippled bothling. Reaching the far end took much longer than it would have during any kind of fight. No charge of glory against the last of his enemies, no attack on the gate, no final struggle or moment of triumphant anticipation ahead as the distant gate of the dwarven walls came into view. "This is not how things were supposed to go," Peiriro cursed. His people were supposed to dominate the mountain, in fact if not in name, grow strong, overthrow the dragons, and one day, range upon range should have been their own. The fantasy of his youthful dreams was now a shattered ruin, like broken glass he sometimes found in the rich dwarven homes, scattered into countless pieces. All he could do was pick up the pieces and try to make something out of whatever structure remained, and hope it gave the Quagga a better life than before. He clenched his jaw while their escort ran ahead shouting unintelligibly, and the gates eventually groaned open. Peiriro watched a figure emerge. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't a dwarf, far too tall, and it rode on a relatively small dragon. That can only be Hedgenmill. So he lived after all. I assumed he died with his father. Peiriro felt at least some relief that someone known to him was approaching. Though most of the Quagga chief's dealings were with the patriarch of the clan, Hedgenmill had never been hostile, and they even shared a few favorable moments when Peiriro asked about particular books that might help develop his people further. Peiriro swallowed as they came closer. The dragon's trot was steady, confident, "Is that really Heginmil?" As dragons went, that one always seemed to slink around more than anything else. Doubt crept in, but as he could make out the face better, it seemed to definitely be him, if a little bit fitter than before. Finally there was no more time to doubt. The white and gold-clad figure who towered over him like a monolith was up close. "I am Ainzul Gaun, King of Nazarick, Master of the Frost Dragons, and King of the Dwarves." The voice. It hammered at Peiryuro's soul as if it were authority manifested in sound itself. This is a king. But determined not to shame himself, he looked up and spoke. "I am Peiryuro, chief of all the Quagoan clans and, I hope, your ally." He turned to the side and gestured to Quad War. "This is Quad War, a survivor of Yaldabaoth's experiments. And what we will all be if the Demon Emperor isn't stopped." Ainz shuddered, but didn't vomit. Am I being case-hardened to atrocities now? He wondered. That wasn't a pleasant thought, but it seemed likely. But still, the body of Dwarf and Quagga had been mutilated beyond all reason, one leg of each race, one arm, both heads on one body and sewn together down the middle. "Majesty." Quad Dwarf spoke in unison as if they shared a common mind. "We agree with each other, the Demon Emperor must be stopped. Neither of us want this for our people. Maybe it's too late for us. But we're the only Bothling. We survived by working together to escape the Demon Emperor's clutches and carry what we knew back to those who would fight him. If the Quagga, dwarves, dragons, and yourself all do as we've done, maybe we can win." Ainz looked the pathetic being over. "I will have to have a talk with Demiurge about this. This is cruel. Needlessly cruel. And the fault is mine for not properly containing his worst impulses. It may be that you can be restored, and both survive," Ainz suggested, and both heads looked at him, open-mouthed and with wild hope. "Ninth-tier healing magic should do the trick," Ainz proposed, and to his surprise, the Bothling answered. "Afterward, let the dwarves see us. Let the Quaggas see us. Once we're all together. If a look at me, us, doesn't convince them to fight together, nothing will." Quad War pointed out insightfully. "There is one problem," Ainz said, and focused on Peiryuro. "I never agreed to accept you as allies." Peiryuro gasped, as did Quad War. "If I accept you as allies, the dwarves will always wonder when you will attack them again for control of the mountain. If I harbor you on equal standing, you might try to put yourselves above a race subordinate to me. It would be far more practical for me to simply leave you to Yaldabaoth to buy time for my subjects to strike in return. I am a king. I don't like a decision like that, but I must think in terms of costs and benefits. If the long-term cost of an alliance is greater than a short-term gain I can have anyway by doing nothing, what choice would you make?" Ainz shrugged before Peiryuro. Peiryuro looked away from Ainz to the pitying face of the dragon, turned mount, and struck upon an idea. "Heginmil, did your relatives make it this far?" he asked. "They did," the frost dragon answered. "Are they living now?" Peiryuro asked. "They are. They submitted to His Majesty as I have," Heginmil replied, then added, "and as I advise you to do." Peiryuro thought that over. "I thought you were dead." "I was killed, but I lived," Heginmil replied with an almost playful snort that expelled a small frosty fog from his nostrils. "If I offer myself as a subordinate, my people submit to you, your Majesty. What then?" Peiryuro recalled the words of those survivors whom this foreign king sent home. The world of possibility which lay ahead. "Then you will stay in your part of the mountain until I can find a proper range to give to you as a homeland all your own. Until then, you will provide raw materials to the dwarves in exchange for goods and the knowledge you need to build the civilization Heginmil has told me you aspire to create. We can work out the fine details later, but you will remain as the chief and be granted the same status as my other citizens." Ainz promised, "Kneel to me, and see your people rise." Quad War was not able to properly kneel, but Peiryuro could, and did, and wished only that he could have done so faster. "Normally we would take more time about this. But I don't believe we have that. I need to know everything you know, and your people need to be armed, equipped, and told more of the history you both have lost. And why you cannot kill one another any longer," Ainz said, and then pointed past them to the Great Rift. "Go, get your people, bring them inside the walls, and we will prepare for the final fight against Yaldabaoth." "As you command, your Majesty," Peiryuro whispered and rose to his feet again. Good, I will wait for you all within, the gates will remain open, you may count on that. Ainz promised. Quadwar, come with me, the dwarves should see you first, it should wipe away any doubts they have. To both the shock of Quadwar and Peri-Euro, the monarch held out a hand to the crippled and mutilated Bothling, and helped him to get up on the dragon to ride behind the king himself. It was a difficult effort, but Quadwar, moved by this compassion, struggled and flailed to leap over the side of the dragon's bowed neck and get into position. When he clung to the white robes with both reverence and desperation. Then the dragon rose up again, and when Ainz squeezed his thighs lightly against Heginmill's scales, the mount began to wheel around to return to the last city under the mountain. Volume 4C49. The stream of Quagoa entering the city of the dwarves brought great dismay. Dwarven parents clutched their children, dwarven elders hid themselves away, and dwarven warriors looked with hatred on even the smallest Quagoan infant. But they were silent because they saw what they were fighting against when they saw Quadwar. The mutilated life of both races blended together in a single tortured being. The city thus gained almost 70,000 new occupants overnight, and finding where to put them proved a massive undertaking that was solved by their king. Warriors all moved to live beside the wall, and the Quagoa who plan on fighting take the same positions. Any homes left empty can be occupied by a few Quagoan families. Ainz suggested, to which the council answered simply. Won't that be uncomfortable for everybody? Did anyone ever say war was a comfortable experience? Ainz retorted, standing before the council. I can augment your food supplies from my kingdom, at least for some time, but we don't need to do this for long anyway. Yaldabaoth will be here soon. I would like to conduct an expedition down into the bottom of the Great Rift to see if it is possible that the item sealing his armies is at the bottom. If it is, the dwarf council immediately drowned out their king with cries of alarm. My lord, perhaps you could survive a trip to the bottom, but nobody ever has. We have no idea what is down there. Maybe the item, maybe not. But if what is down there is too great even for you, then Yaldabaoth will destroy us all with or without his armies. The eldest council member had his entire body shivering as if he were freezing. His trembling hands were outstretched as he implored his king, don't do that, we know we can kill demons now. Let him chance destruction. If he fails, all our problems are over. If he succeeds, we can fend off his armies while you handle him. Ainz could only concede on that point. This is a considerable risk. But very well. If he succeeds, you will face his demon armies, I will handle the rest. In the few days that followed, scattered survivors of Yaldabaoth's torments, and then the less than handful that faced his assault on the Quagoa position, made their way back to the dwarven city. Ainz gate spell was used in public for the first time in the city square, and skeletons pulling carts of fish harvested from the Frogman and the Lizardman Lake, as well as from the farms in former Baharuthian territory, began to make their way into dwarven and Quagoan bellies alike. While it wasn't rich fare by any means, as the citizens and the Quagoan allies lined up in good order for food, the reputation of the king began to grow with every filled belly. The dwarven commander made a point of being seen walking with Peri-Euro through the city streets, and the Quagoa began to marvel at the rune-crafted armor they were being equipped with, and in particular developed a fondness for the metal claws that were added on as a sort of bonus. So armored Quagoa became a common sight in the last city, not least because the Quagoa refused to take it off, and joint drills began, with the dragons taking flight while dwarven long-range weapons were practiced and the infantry of both forces drilled in front of the city. The seething hatred was not gone, but under the threat of annihilation, it was buried, and a grudging professional appreciation for their differences began to take shape. Quadwar's public display in the city square was almost constant. Anyone doubting the need to cooperate quickly ceased to doubt it when they beheld the monstrosity. If this disturbed Quadwar, he said nothing of the sort, only telling the story of the escape to whomever would listen to it. Ainz, of course, drew from all the stories and mythologies he could think of to piece together the story of an ancient past in which the Quagoa and the dwarves had lived close to the way they did now, and explaining Yaldabaoth's hatred for them both. It was a glorious age, like nothing I've seen in this one. My kingdom was widespread, our accomplishments. Well, some of our artifacts seem to have made their way into popular stories and even actual use in the world outside the mountain. He sighed and often looked away from his listeners, constantly stuck thinking, why? Oh, why am I like this? While he continued to overact for reasons that were beyond his comprehension, the races of the New World seemed to absolutely eat it up like a starving man at a feast. Not for the first time he wondered, is there something wrong with my tastes, or theirs? But he endured the struggles of those swiftly passing days until a bell over the city began to toll for them all. The cause of the alarm was quickly obvious when the 9-meter-tall Yaldabaoth spread his arms and wings out, and swept down on the now empty fortress beyond the Great Rift, and smashed it with a punch. The shattering stones flew far from where they sat at rest, some striking the very walls of the dwarven city where they shattered into fragments before landing as pebbles below. Einzulgaun. He is among you, is he not? Yaldabaoth bellowed, and flames gouted from his mouth and between the crag-like gaps in his stone-like flesh. The city was silent but for the bells when the voice of the Demon Emperor rang out. Within the city, Ainz looked over the sea of faces. My part has come. It's hard to believe he came alone, but here he is. Wish your king luck, he shouted and flung his leg over Heginmal's bowed neck. Hail his majesty. Long may he reign. The call went up, and Heginmal's wings beat and the frost dragon rose above the dimly lit city of stone. You were right. I am here, Yaldabaoth. Ainz pointed with a dramatic and showy flourish that made him cringe within. Still protecting the weak little insects the same way you always did. Yaldabaoth swept a hand before himself to encompass the whole. Worthless animals can't even keep from killing each other. All that you did, and they forgot, falling to their deepest and most vile instincts. Pathetic worms that they are, if we leave them alone, they'll go right back to it again. Why bother with such trash? Submit to me, and we can divide the world between us. The city was quiet, a way out was there before the eyes of their savior, a perfect deal, half the world, if it could be managed. It was hard to imagine it would be refused. Yet it was. No. Ainz replied in a soft voice that still echoed off the stone and back to every ear. A king is a father to his people, they are his children, and he must watch out for them even when they're wrong. That is what you never understood, Yaldabaoth. You could never understand that, because you're a child, just a child with power. You never had responsibility before and don't know how to take it or handle it. So, I must put you down. How about we compromise? I'm going down now. Yaldabaoth taunted, folded his arms so that they crossed over his chest, stiffened his legs against one another, and then folded his wings in front of his body so that they wrapped like a cloak. He then dropped like a stone toward the rift. Demiurge is really overplaying his role. They seem to respond to it. But by God, I can't let him spend too much time with Pandora's actor, or who knows what might happen. Ainz shuddered at the thought as Yaldabaoth descended into the distant darkness. Nothing happened. Minutes passed into minutes. Demiurge is controlling the evil Lord of Wrath. So, if something happened, he would have reached out to me for sure. Ainz thought, and Heginmal simply beat his wings and waited. Do you think? Could he be dead, Master? Could something down there be stronger than him? If so, everything will be fine, right? Heginmal asked, looking behind him to his rider. Heginmal, Ainz chuckled, has anyone ever told you that you should never set flags like that? Master? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Heginmal cocked his head in confusion just as the rumbling began. Yaldabaoth began to ascend into view, and hordes of demons with him. Mocking, evil laughter rang out from the Demon Emperor as his wings beat at the air and demons of all kinds charged toward the city gate. Ainz used the spell himself, and a void appeared before the city gate through which his Death Knights began to charge. Their massive tower shields began to cut into the demons on the ground. Hundreds of them locked positions and began to advance. The demon flyers began to attack the city walls, screaming with wild hunger for blood as they lashed out with claws. Armored Quagoans began to leap bodily onto the small demons and tear into them so that pairs would fight like rats. Dwarven archers began to knock and loose arrows without even bothering to aim. Flight upon flight enchanted arrows with holy magic and blasts from their lightning weapons doing what they could, began to rip into demonic hordes. From far behind the city rose the beating wings of the survivors of the Frost Dragon clan, and they split the air with their roars and soared toward their demonic enemies, their frost breath shooting out and raking above and below as chaos enveloped the battlefield. Heginmal, Ainz shouted, and the dragons swept toward the Demon Emperor, Thousand Bone Lance. Reality Slash. Cord Cutter. Ainz spammed his magic attacks, choosing the flashiest he could while Heginmal frantically raked out with claws, tail and breath to busy the Demon Emperor's limbs and allow his master to fight at his maximum potential. I'm going to die again. I can't hurt this thing, it's all I can do to use my frost breath to keep him from burning me too badly. The pair clashed back and forth, charging like knights with lances over a tournament field. The Demon Emperor was several times the height of the white and gold-cladded king, and yet to those spectators down below one thing was clear above all else. The Demon Emperor can't bring him down. They hurled one another back and forth against the stone, the mountain shook, and loose rocks began to fall as pebbles from above. Dragons picked up demons and threw them into the abyss, and howls of pain were as common as dust particles. "Open the gates!" Peiryu shouted to the commander. "We can turn the tide, we have to keep the wall clear." The dwarven commander looked at the headdress-bearing chief as if he were mad, then seeing demons clambering over the top where they got around the dreadful tower shield-bearing knights, he nodded. "Right, we have enormous numbers in reserve. If we keep the walls clear, we keep the demons out of the city. If they get in, it's all over." "Right. Open the gates. Take yours out first, we'll be right behind you." The commander bellowed the order, and the gates began to split. Peiryu, however, was in no mood to wait. "My elites. My greatest of my great. My warriors all, this is it. We do or we die," he shouted, and he rushed for the gap before it was clear whether anyone followed or not. He didn't look behind him to see. They did. A roar hit his back that would have made a dragon proud, as tens of thousands of fierce quaggoers rushed out after their ruler and broke to spread themselves in half on either side of the outnumbered Death Knights. As the last of the quaggoan warriors made it out of the gate, the dwarven commander took up the signal horn that hung from his neck. He took a deep breath, and blew it as hard as he could. "Are you going to let the quaggoer show you up before our king? Attack! Attack! Attack!" And he followed after the quaggoers while the reserves poured out of every position and ran through the gate, their runecraft armor glinting in the dim light. The clatter of the thousands upon thousands of dwarves with their long halberds rushing into the fray was at least locally greater than that of the battle itself, when coupled with the thousands of pounding feet. Heinz had an excellent view of the struggle. The demon army sacrificed some power for numbers, and it made them intimidating, but beatable. With the dragons sweeping low and raking them with breath or claws and the knights creating a wedge supported by flanking quaggoer and dwarves on the wings to continue the pushback, it was progress. Bright spells of mines and white flames that might as well have been holy light as far as the watchers were concerned, raked over the Demon Emperor, who pushed himself back to make space to say, "How are your armies holding out like this? How is this possible?" Runecraft did not die out, Heinz shouted back, and the charge renewed. "Why? Why is Demiurge making him so cheesy? Was he spending time with Pandora's actor without my knowing, or... No, he couldn't have gotten the idea to act this way from me, could he?" The thought was briefly broken when Yaldabaoth bellowed, "It doesn't matter. If I take you down, then my next wave will wipe them all from this world." The charge was met with a blast of frost breath and a brutal onslaught of bone lances, but Yaldabaoth had his arms wrapped around the king and pulled him from his mount. "Master!" Hegemil cried out in alarm, and the dragons soaring over the armies of the dwarves and quaggoer redoubled their efforts in desperation. The fall stopped the waves of charging demons at least, leaving limited numbers to deal with. "We've got to help him," Hegemil cried out, and turning to the backs of the demons, he began to charge with mad courage. "I'm no warrior. I'm not my father, I'm not my father, I'm not my father. This isn't what I meant for." He cried out in his head and did his best to let out a properly dragonish roar as he barreled into the back with claws and breath flailing without much skill to speak of. Luck, however, was on his side as the armies advanced. The Death Knights and dragons began to be able to hurl flightless demons toward the Great Rift, and none climbed back up. The smaller and weaker dwarves and quaggoer were unable to do the same, but with their holy weapons they kept the worst at bay while the dragons and Death Knights did the heavy lifting for them. The endless waves were gone, though the question of why was in every head as they drew closer and closer to the edge of the abyss that was the Great Rift. When the last of the demons was hurled screaming below, and the last flying demon fell with torn wings or tumbled to their deaths in agony to land with a sickening thud, there was no battle cry of victory. Nor could there be. Is Yaldabaoth dead? That question was answered with the cries of battle in the darkness. Occasional sparks could be seen that up close must have been gouts of hellfire. Then there was silence, and the chill of fate's pointed hand seemed to be leveled at them all as they recognized the sound of Yaldabaoth's laughter. His hands open at his sides, his wings flapping, his maw, large enough to swallow a quagga or dwarf whole, came slowly into view while he rose from the darkness of the great rift. "Surrender," he said, "and I promise you quick deaths. You beat my army. But you forgot one thing." He did not leave them wondering long. "I am an army." He laughed long and loud at dragon, dwarf, and quagga alike, "and I cannot be beaten." "Get up," Hejinmal whispered, cutting countless places that would leave many scars if no healing magic was used. "No," Hejinmal shouted at the demon emperor. Though Yaldabaoth tried to appear unharmed, rivulets of burning blood were dripping from more wounds than could easily be counted. Though it contributed to his horrifying appearance, Hejinmal could see through the facade. "You're hurt." "He hurt you. You're not a god. You can die," Hejinmal bellowed out, and like it was a call to action, halberds snapped to position, claws struck into combat postures, and the larger dragons wheeled around ready to charge again. "Fools! If he couldn't defeat me!" Yaldabaoth. The voice in the darkness was like the noise of 10,000 chariots and their horses rolling over a field, and from the darkness came a white blur. "It's not possible. I killed you," Yaldabaoth gasped as he was struck full in the chest and sent rocketing into the sky of stone, then straight through into the dark of night, exposing the stars for the first time to those who had never seen them. "Now that we're out of range," Ainz bellowed, "super tier magic, hypernova." A brilliant light engulfed their fresh view of the starry night, and a scream came from within it. "Demiurge, store Albert's item," Ainz whispered close to his subordinate's ear as the roar of magic drowned all the world out beyond them. As the evil Lord of Wrath's eyes sparkled with his controller's understanding, and all were hidden by the burst of light, Ainz withdrew a scroll of duplication from his inventory and held it over the prototype Albert had made. "Duplicate," he activated the scroll, and a useless duplicate appeared in Ainz's open palm. What Demiurge used to give the evil Lord of Wrath, the appearance of burning up, Ainz wasn't sure, but it made for quite the dramatic show. The viewing host of the living below brought to a reverential silence when they could see that only one remained alive. Then very slowly, the king began to descend again, and the ashes of Yaldabaoth came back with him like little black snowflakes. In his hand, the king held the object Yaldabaoth used. "This will never be used again," he said, and clenched his fist over it, seemingly shattering the object into pieces, and then burning it to ash with a single spell.